All right, here we go. All right, everybody, welcome to the Sandbox podcast. It's a platform where we learn to lead well with other leaders. It's gonna be a good day after Easter, don't you know? Coming to you live from the good land, it is Tyler Richardson, and welcome to the Sandbox podcast. Happy New Week, day after Easter, so obviously you're probably in a little bit more of a chipper mood than you usually are. You still, are wearing some of the new clothes that you bought, flaunting around in your new pastels, which that's awesome. And we're excited for what we're about to do today. And what that is we're starting a new trend in the Sandbox podcast called The Practical Gospels. Now, in the Practical Gospels, it is going to be something that we do every 4 months. So, 1, 2, 3, 4, the last week of that month, and then 1, 2, 3, 4 after that, the last week of that month, we will apply Practical Gospels. And we will do that for who knows how long we, feel to do that, either till Jesus comes back or until we get a new idea, whatever comes first. But basically what we're going to do in Practical Gospels is we're going to have just a little bit of a shorter podcast to give a little bit more application to the things that we talk about. Some of these podcasts are a little ethereal and so deep in the emotions, and, you have to chew on a lot of the topics sometimes. Or, you just, in some cases, you just deal with it and you move on. But in some cases, there's a little bit more 1-2 step that really is involved. And the Practical Gospel episodes are going to specifically help give some application to those things. And each one will be a little bit different, dealing with different topics, and hopefully they are helpful. I think the more practical that we can be, the quicker we can become the leaders that we're supposed to be, and that we can affect for the better the people that we lead around. So hopefully this will help. And what we are going to do in the first ever Practical Gospels is we're going to talk about stop talking about your heart. Yes, stop talking about your heart. Now, this is where that sentence comes from. I cut my teeth and got my sea legs in a lot of leadership isms from initial ministry, and then from school, and then from business, and then kind of back to ministry, and then now I'm a little bit of like half business, half ministry is kind of the world I'm in right now. And what I've learned is there would often be a scenario, specifically in the early ministry days, where there would be some type of offensive situation that would happen. Somebody got a solo stolen, or somebody, missed a rehearsal and they weren't allowed to sing, or there was just something. Usually it was very petty, but what happened was it was a petty thing followed by a petty thing, followed by a petty thing, followed by a petty thing. And usually, if you've ever been in scenarios like this, even beyond ministry, those petty things kind of pile up and become a mountain of if I don't say something, I'm just going to burst, I'm going to explode. And then in those moments, either the person that's been offended lashes out, in a group setting, or usually it just happens at the wrong time, just because we just don't handle our emotions the best a lot of times. And usually what will happen is somebody calls into question a decision that was made, or calls into question maybe somebody's motives, or calls into question, the inability to really open up the floor for honest discussion. And in those moments, usually there's a tagline that gets attached to the person that either feels attacked or feel like they're getting ganged up on. What will happen is a statement rises to the surface, and that statement usually is, "Oh, no, that's not my heart. No. Oh, well, I would hope y'all would understand. That's not my heart." I would think, as well as we know each other by now, you would know that's, not my heart. Or they would start to tell you some like either really bad news or some news you just really don't want to hear, and they would preface it with, "Now, y'all know my heart, and ... bomb drop." Or, "Now you guys know my heart, and how I feel about this, but I just would like to say," and then, fill in the blank with just something offensive and like, "Oh man, I wish you really would have said that." You know what I'm saying? There are those type of things. And when I'm saying stop talking about your heart, this is what I mean by that. People don't really care about the rise to the top response of what you think your heart is, because a lot of times what we think our heart is not the reality in other people's eyes towards us. Obviously, in some cases, this, differs from case to case. But I think one of the first things we really have to touch is that we usually naturally think our heart is very positive, very pure, the best motives, the best ambitions. And then what usually happens is when we consider the heart of others, there's a tilt to it. We think they have an agenda. We think that they're, kind of slimy. We think that they don't really, have our best interest in heart. And it's very interesting how pure our own hearts are in our own imagination, and how crooked and growing and in development the hearts of other people are. And that really comes into a lot of places of conflict. And I think sometimes it really makes the petty so much more giant than it has to. And then it causes so much, divisiveness, and causes so much awkwardness that's really unnecessary. And so what we're going to talk about today is how to really deal with that. And I think the best way to deal with that is to open up your ability to see inside yourself that your heart may not always be what you naturally think it is. I think usually we kind of say our heart in a sense of almost like we were saying our vision statement or our mission statement. Like it's something that's just implied. We never really talk about it. And even though our actions may not always reflect what that is, at the end of the day, it's always about that mission statement. It's always about that vision statement. But that's not really the way it works. Usually people don't know your calling card. People know you. So you want to make sure that you is lining up with your calling card. And I think the best way to do that is to get rid of assumptions. And the best way to make sure that your heart leaves imagination and goes into action with you and others, again, is removing assumptions. And when I say removing assumptions, I mean the positivity assumptions of your heart and the negative assumptions of other people's heart. And there are plenty of assumptions usually that are indifferent, but what I want to focus on today are not the ones that you're indifferent on, like I really could care less about Kelly, I really could care less about Thomas, I really only care about Matthew and Topanga. No, this is a situation you really want to focus in on what you naturally pay attention to. Those are the assumptions I'm talking about. And usually I mean the responsive voice on the inside of us in moments of conflict or awkwardness or annoyance, if I can be so blunt in most cases. And what I think is, if someone thinks you're rude, if they come up to you and think that you're rude, do you naturally assume, well, that's just because those people are sensitive? And if someone comes up to you and says they're offended at you, is your natural response and your natural assumption the fact that they are jealous of you? Or if someone wants to learn from you and kind of shadow you in your element and see all the things, is there a natural assumption that rises up in you, well, that they're political manipulators? You know what I'm saying? And I think oftentimes one of the biggest problems is we kind of cover with a blanket this whole idea of the reality of the dysfunction, because being open about a dysfunction a lot of times is funny, and being open about a dysfunction kind of keeps everybody on an equal playing ground. So it's like, we all got our issues, you like to, be mean to people, and I like to make people feel bad about themselves. We all got our thing, and we're not that open, and we're not that, that blunt about it, but in the reality, that's really what we're saying. And I think a lot of times we cover it up with, oh yeah, y'all are gonna have to pray for me, ha ha ha, because a lot of times so and so really wants to sing, but sometimes I just feel it and I just gotta steal the spotlight and I gotta sing. And then sometimes this person needs to make a business choice, and I always raise up my hand and say that their choices are stupid, even though that's not what I'm saying. That's what I'm saying. And a lot of times, a lot of people think I'm rebellious, but it's not that I'm rebellious. I just got a lot to say, and then I just want to make sure we make the right decisions. You got to pay attention to how your assumptions are with the positivity and the purity of your own, and the negativity and the in development, oh, they just don't know better yet, but one day they'll be like me, assumptions that you have about the heart of others. And I think one of the purest ways I've found that really deals with this is, first of all, you have to pay attention to that voice that comes up. Again, if somebody thinks that you're rude, your natural response to that person, you need to start opening yourself up to paying attention to what your first reaction is. is your first reaction is, actually the fact is that you're just sensitive. You have to open up just your imagination to consider the fact that maybe it's not the fact that they're sensitive. Maybe you are rude. Maybe they're not jealous of you. Maybe you are acting like an idiot. Maybe they're not political manipulators. Maybe you are just full of yourself. You have to open yourself up to all of these possibilities. You have to assume that people are not always lying and that they're not the issue whenever they have an issue with you. Again, you have to assume that people are not the issue just because they have an issue with you. And obviously it's very easy to aim in it because we all think of people that have looked at us the wrong way and have misjudged us and looked wrongly on our actions and thought wrongly about our behaviors. But the reality is that I think often it's very easy to forget that it's kind of a domino effect. If you feel that way about somebody else, it's very likely that somebody feels that way about you, and we have to open up ourselves about that. And I think, again, one of the easiest way, we've talked about this before, but again, I think one of the easiest ways to really deal with this is going over and above to serve those people around you. And not just serve them, not just say yes when they ask you to do things, but where they're not asking for your help, to serve in those arenas. And I'm not talking about being used and abused and being a doormat for somebody, but I'm talking about serving where you are already bothered and where you would secretly want to, you would secretly want to help anyway. I think a lot of times, if you're anything like me, I naturally kind of walk around and have a constant conversation going on in my head of, things I would change if I go in a restaurant, of something I would change with lighting, or something I would change with a display, or if I'm in a store, something I would change about a t-shirt design, or so. I'm always thinking of little things I see everywhere. That's probably an issue. I should probably get that worked on. That's a dysfunction in myself that I need to be open to fixing. But in your organizations, in your teams, are there little areas that always bother you that don't bother other people? And that you have the full ability to get up from your seat when you're done with your, specific task or whatever, and you can make that a new task for you that nobody asked you for, you don't get a bonus for, nobody pats you on the back for it, you don't get a hand clap when you walk in the room because you did it, and it may even be 3 months before they even notice that you've been doing it in the first place. Those are the things that really make a difference in your own heart. The Bible talks about a principle that if a government official came up to you and asked you to walk a mile to perform a task for the government, that Jesus would think it would be the best idea to not only do the 1 mile task they've asked of you, but to actually make the task 2 miles. And the reason you should make the task 2 miles is because they have the authority to ask you to do 1 mile, but you have the authority to do the 2nd mile. And the healing comes in the 2nd mile. And what that means is that somebody asking you to do something you don't want to do, in that moment, there's a seed of offense that is trying to really germinate and have its say in you. But you have the ability to take that seed out and really heal that, even if it wasn't intended to be offensive, you have the ability to take an offensive situation on that 2nd mile by your own choice and by your own actions to heal that and to keep yourself free from bitterness, free from, unnecessary issues, and you can move forward with that. And that's where true power comes from. That's where true ability to lead leaders and not just lead people comes from. It comes from that true decision to make a choice. The decision to make a choice. Because you don't just make a choice, you have to make a decision to make a choice. When somebody comes up to you with that attitude, you have that ability in that moment to make a choice. If somebody, blatantly screws you over, you have the ability in that moment to make a choice. If you are the one that dropped the ball and it's your fault, you also in that moment have the ability to choose. If a chapter is closed and you can't go back and fix your mistakes, you still have the ability to choose in that moment to move forward and to dust yourself off and see what could possibly be available in the future for you. You have to make a decision to choose. What I've learned is a lot of leaders become the way they are out of survival. Okay, a lot, especially the successful ones. A lot of leaders become the way they are out of survival. So if you run into a leader that's very closed off, it's probably not because they have a closed off personality. It's probably because they've had a lot of hurt, and out of survival to not get hurt anymore, they became closed off. It's the exact same thing. If you run into a leader that has an attitude, it's probably because they decided they had to have an attitude to be taken seriously. So many times when we run in and we butt heads with specific leaders, it's possible the main thing that really bugs you and just feels like it just rubs you like sandpaper. That is probably an element of their personality that they attached to their personality. Not something that's naturally who they are, but something that they added to themselves because they wanted to survive in this harsh warfare of leadership. And you have to understand that you and me had the exact same ability to make the wrong decisions and the wrong choices and to make the choice to try and survive. But we have a chance to become leaders of discipline. And leaders of discipline are people who make a choice to do the second mile stuff. The second mile stuff. People, it's not a surprise and it's not a secret. There are plenty and plenty and plenty of leaders who want to use you and abuse you, who do not care about your future, who do not care about your home life, who do not care about anything about you. They need you to help them out. And when you're no longer useful to them, they don't want anything to do with you. There are plenty of people like that. But what kind of leader are you going to be? That's the question. I know there's plenty of leaders who do things a certain way, and so now it's just easier to kind of just go with the flow. But what kind of leader do you want to be? And if you are the leader I think you want to be, or you would not be listening to this podcast, or because there's plenty of other better things to listen to. Please, I barely know what I'm talking about. I just happen to know enough to fill 23.46, time slots to make this work. And I think the reality is that we have such a unique ability if we will make the choice to have correct discipline. I think a specific practical way we can do this in teams is to write anonymous letters that either we turn in quarterly or monthly or whatever works the best, and really either talk about a specific issue that's either big picture or maybe it's day to day, but something that's anonymous so people feel like they won't get in trouble. Because the reality is, even if you feel like your team is different, it's not. Even though you feel like your organization or your church or whatever is different, I promise you it's probably not. So if you keep things anonymous, even though you think that's not necessary, I promise you will get better, more honest answers, and everybody will be able to not hold their breath and feel like they won't get fired because you've created a safe space. Something as small as being anonymous and not knowing who sent in a question or who sent in a complaint really gives free reign on a whole lot of things that you wouldn't realize until you do it. Another thing is we got to learn to not just celebrate wins, but celebrate lessons. Okay? Not just celebrate wins, not just celebrate that we never make a mistake, that we never trip up, that we never fail, that we never drop the ball. You need to celebrate lessons, not just the wins. Especially this is kind of business or ministry. This is very big depending on specific staff meetings or whatever. We want to be like, how are we doing? Awesome. I want to know how we're doing awesome. And usually we spend so much time on what we're doing awesome that we didn't really need to know what we're doing awesome, because it's usually stuff we're already naturally supposed to be doing awesome, or we shouldn't be hired. If you do awesome on a solo, I naturally am not going to tell you, how grateful I am that you did awesome, because if you didn't do awesome, I wouldn't naturally want you to sing a solo. If you can't do a solid social media campaign, then why would I let you do it? So I'm not going to just spend 4 months telling you the 1 week in August you did a social media campaign was outstanding, because that's what you are supposed to do. And that's your first mile. But the second mile angle of, what you can add to it and all that kind of stuff, obviously that changes the game a little bit. But again, I think the real fruit comes people coming in and be like, I totally messed this up. I thought I knew how to do this, this, and this, and I was clueless. But now it's a month and a half later, and now I actually know how to do it. Now I feel like I'm, able to even teach other people how to do it. Don't just celebrate wins, celebrate lessons. And I think we also have to fight to choose avenues of communication that are consistent and not just charming. Okay? Fight to choose avenues of communication that are consistent and not just charming. I'm going to say it a third time because you got to hear it. Fight to choose avenues of communication that are consistent and not just charming. Anybody can come together in a quote unquote, maybe you've heard this before, come to Jesus meeting. We can all cry. We can all wash each other's feet. We can all, buy each other dinner. We can all, sing, love can build a bridge. We can do all of that kind of stuff and really feel like, wow, I really feel like things are going to turn around. But if you remove the consistency of it, it will not work. It would be better to have meetings that are not so moving and we're not all crying and hugging each other, but at least it happens every quarter, or at least it happens every Monday, or at least it happens at the same time, every other month. The power is in the consistency. It's in the consistency of the event. It's not in the charm of the feeling and the moment. And oh wow, I've never seen so and so be so emotionally vulnerable and be so raw and open. How powerful is that? That's awesome. But if it's not, if there's not an environment for that to take place consistently, that's the problem. It doesn't have to be emotionally consistent, which means not every time you get together you have to cry, but you at least have to come together every time. And every time you come together, there needs to be that space for somebody to be emotional. That's perfectly fine. But just one, I think we had a staff meeting like 2 years ago, and that was I'm really glad we did that 2 years ago. Oh, but 2 years ago, let me tell you, it was one for the ages. No. You got to remove the charm element of the one big burst, and you really got to apply the consistency, because that's where the power is going to be. Because remember, we've talked about this before. People are always looking for an excuse to be one way or another. People are always looking for an excuse to have an attitude. And you having an attitude gives somebody an excuse to have an attitude. You being late gives somebody an excuse to be late. You having bitterness issues with somebody that's dead is only giving an excuse for somebody else that dies, to cause another domino effect of bitterness. But since people are always looking for an excuse to behave a certain way or another way, we can be the leaders that provide fresh excuses. And that's the power I want y'all to understand. We have the ability to give people fresh excuses. You have the ability to give somebody an excuse not to have an attitude. You get to have the ability to give somebody else and some other leader coming up either beside you or maybe 2 decades after you've already, retired. You have the ability to give somebody a fresh excuse to think about things the right way, to treat people the right way, to create honest and open discussions where people feel safe and we can move forward in a fruitful manner. We have that ability, and that is the ability worth fighting for. And I promise you, we will be better for it. So, that's the first episode of Practical Gospels, and I feel pretty good. I don't know if it's because I'm still, in the residue of Easter or what, but that Practical Gospel, I don't know if it's an episode 1 or what it would be called, but part 1, whatever you want to call it. All that to say, Practical Gospels first one, I think we knocked it out of the park, and I hope it helps somebody. Let us know where you're listening from. Subscribe, comment, email us, harpandbold.org/sandbox. We want to get on this journey together. We're going to be better for it, and all the good things are in the future. I hope you guys are ready for this creative camp for the summer session, because it's going to be all time. At least I'm hoping it's going to be all time, and if it's not, then I'm probably going to delete this later, so you won't remember that I said it. But other than that, I'm really excited about it. Practical Gospels. Remember, make the tough choices for discipline. We will be better for it. Can't wait to talk to you next time, and let's remember to play nice in the sandbox.